Hello, everybody. My name is Jake Shearer. I'm the product manager and one of the anatomists at Touch of Life Technologies. I'm very excited to be here to talk to you today about improving healthcare education through virtual experiences with real anatomy. Now, before we get into our extended reality hardware solutions, let's talk about what that means. Virtual experiences with real anatomy. If you're in the main session, I'm sure you saw that Greg Spitzer talked about the Visible Human Project and the data there. And so everything that we do is informed by real cadaveric anatomy. You can see some images from the Visible Human Project. And the way that this data was acquired was a body donor was frozen and serially sectioned and imaged at 1 millimeter intervals through the entirety of his body. Between each sectioning, a full color digital image was taken. And we took these images and built a full color volume out of it. So much like a CT or an MR is a volume of images, this is a full color volume of a human body. Our founder, Dr. Vic Spitzer, was actually the principal investigator of this project. And so we've been working with this data since its creation. And Toltec was founded on the vision of making real anatomy accessible in a virtual space and not tied down to a cadaver lab. Our latest data sets have been sectioned at 50 microns. And the resolution of these latest data sets is absolutely incredible. You can see an example in the lower right corner of this slide. This is a section through a pelvis. And in the callout box, you can see an organ, and that organ is an ovary. And the detail is so great that you can see structures that are very difficult or impossible to see with the naked eye, such as corpus lutea, follicles, arterioles, venules, and more. And so by having these full color volumetric data sets, we can create an experience outside of a lab with real anatomy. Now, we took this image data, this image volume, and through a process of segmentation, we reconstructed three-dimensional representations of the body donor's actual organs. This means that our anatomical models are true to this individual's actual anatomy. They have not been artistically rendered or abstracted. And this led to the creation of our flagship software, the VH Dissector, and you can see that on this slide. In this software, you can interact with the cross-sections, you can interact with the 3D anatomy, and there's even a section for learning content. Right here, we can see a cadaver dissection guide. And this is a module that we provide, and dissection courses around the world use this to guide their in-person cadaver dissection. And the advantage of this is that the students can have access to these full color cross-sections and 3D models to better understand spatial relationships. This VH Dissector software is used in anatomy classrooms around the world, from high school to postgraduate level. And this lesson panel allows easy integration so that institutions don't have to reinvent the wheel or create new curriculum. They can take their existing content and fold it directly into the software. And this flexibility is incredibly powerful. In keeping with our passion for real anatomy, we've partnered with Sectra Clinical Imaging. The Sectra Education Portal has histology, embryology, CT, and MR data sets, and it even allows institutions to upload their own clinical imaging data, bringing the flexibility in our software ecosystem up to the point when we can study clinical data and specific pre-made learning content. Now let's talk about what anatomy was like pre-COVID. This is actually the class photo for my anatomy class. It was in 2018, which feels like 10 years ago at this point. And these days, such a photo would be unthinkable. Even makes me uncomfortable to look at, and I'm in it. That's me right there. And so prior to the pandemic, anatomy learning was thought to really only be possible in person, in a cadaver lab, and in a lecture hall. And it would be unfathomable to propose that an instructor could teach graduate level anatomy in one place and their students in disparate places. But of course, lockdown happened. And we had to ask ourselves the question, how could cadaveric dissection, a physically immersive learning experience and the cornerstone of anatomy education, even be possible outside of a lab, with the instructor and learners interacting virtually? Well, the COVID-19 pandemic brought to light many issues in society, and the academic institutions were no exception. We became aware of huge disparities in the access and equity of learning resources when students left campus. And what was to be done? The pandemic forced institutions to reckon with and deal with these disparities. Opportunities to innovate and flip the traditional academic model became available. Educators tasked with adapting how they taught to this new situation were keen to experiment and explore how to deliver content to close these gaps. I'm sure many of us recognize this iconic Rembrandt painting, the post-COVID anatomy lesson of Dr. Nicolaes Tulip. Well, unsurprisingly, educators have found ways to leverage technology to ensure that students have broad access to resources, whether learning remotely or in person. Institutions turned to anatomy visualization software to create robust virtual anatomy experiences and maintain opportunities for in-depth exploration of the human body when in-person cadaver labs could not be held. Many programs have started to adopt hybrid learning structures, with incorporating virtual dry labs with their in-person wet labs, creating collaborative student-centered learning experiences that supported but did not replace the traditional learning modalities. Altogether, the pandemic put virtual resources to the test and demonstrated their value. And educators have been eager to participate in research. Toltec has created a leading anatomy platform which allows students and educators alike to explore and to learn about the human body. Our virtual anatomy resources dominate the market in academic spaces. We have created a virtual anatomy ecosystem that is broadening to become as platform agnostic as possible. Students and educators can interact with this virtual anatomy on mobile devices, on PCs and laptops, large format multi-touch display tables, VR and AR headsets such as the Varjo and the Hololens. And as programs return to in-person anatomy lab experiences, we are witnessing the adoption and the integration of these extended reality technologies explode. Educators are learning from the past year and a half about how they can improve what's been going on for so long. These technologies can serve as valuable supplemental tools in medical education, and they demonstrate significant applications in the clinical care of patients as well. Now, there's no doubt that the pandemic has changed a lot about the world. When it comes to anatomy, in my opinion, the pandemic ultimately expanded the ways that we can access, learn about, interact with, and study the human body. And as the need to interact with virtual data has increased, Toltec maintains its place at the forefront of this changing and dynamic landscape through the VH Dissector software and the hardware that we support. Our cross-platform solution empowers us to put real anatomy into the hands of anyone, anytime, anywhere. Every day we work with institutions, helping them shape their curriculum to integrate these immersive learning technologies. Our longstanding goal is to improve healthcare education through virtual experiences with real anatomy. And so before this pandemic even hit, we were prepared for this unprecedented paradigm shift in academia. And as immersive learning environments continue to demonstrate value in medical education, Toltec is working with a growing number of institutions and hardware partners to adopt and implement these innovative technologies. The evidence suggests that learning in immersive environments improves learning outcomes and optimizes time to skill acquisition. This is why in-person cadaver labs are so important. Those are immersive learning experiences. And it's no wonder that the value of extended reality technology has become a primary focus of educational research. The impacts of the pandemic, the need to innovate, were not restricted to academia. All facets of healthcare were strained. Researchers had to figure out how to collaborate and visualize data with their colleagues. Healthcare providers had to find ways to educate their patients in this new virtual world. And I think it is fair to say that the disparities in access to anatomy education resources and visualizations is the most profound in clinical environments where patients need to understand anatomy for their peace of mind. So far, research and experience is demonstrating that extended reality technologies have a lot of value both academically and clinically. This video is shot with the Microsoft HoloLens 2, a device being used by many highly skilled industries, and we've seen some presentations on them already. And the reason why it's being used is because it has been shown to improve visual spatial abilities and create an environment where learners can deepen their understanding of the complex spatial relationships of the anatomy that they need to know for a procedure. We have adapted the VH Dissector to allow real virtual anatomy to be used in conjunction with the real world, a simulation mannequin. And with using these technologies in lower stakes environments, learners can really focus on honing their decision-making skills, their critical thinking skills, and their clinical reasoning skills. We have now partnered with extended reality industry leaders such as Varjo to deliver an unmatched, immersive, virtual experience that can help prepare healthcare providers to treat the human body. With ultra-high resolution headsets like the Varjo XR3, the physical and digital worlds can be combined seamlessly, and learners can interact with cross-sectional data, 3D models, learning content, and lab content, like a cadaver, with no compromise in quality or resolution. Now, if you've taken a cadaver lab, imagine what it would have been like to use some of this technology to help support your learning. What concepts would you be more comfortable with? Would you have been able to work more collaboratively with your colleagues? Then how would those experiences translate to where you are now in your career? Many schools have recognized the importance of studying anatomy longitudinally. The University of Colorado School of Medicine is one of the leaders in this revolution, and we are located on their campus. Time in anatomy labs is a precious commodity. Just think about true-to-life virtual anatomy and how it can augment and support this precious time. Repeated exposure to anatomy throughout a student's career, a multimodal anatomy learning experience integrating the real and the virtual, can help lay the foundation for their professional career. And clinicians who have this experience can use their fluency in virtual anatomy to help educate their patients more efficiently. And patients are arguably the people that anatomy is the most important to at the moment, because it is their body that is being healed. Now, this all sounds amazing, and it looks amazing, and personally, I love it. But the question remains, is it effective? Now, we were lucky enough to work with Baylor University and their Doctor of Physical Therapy program. They allowed us to help integrate a virtual reality experience into their curriculum. Their hybrid curriculum is unique because it's largely remote, but starting about a week before the exam, the students come back together for intensive in-person group work. The students are expected to do problem-based learning, team-based learning, wet lab experiences, and this year, virtual dry labs. We worked together to design this virtual dry lab, and we were able to do a preliminary study with their 100+ DPT students. What was the results? How do they feel? How do the students feel? Because the students are the ones that if they don't buy in, they don't sign on, then nothing's going to happen. And we all know that if you're enjoying your education, you become more engaged and your learning outcomes improved. The vast majority of the students thought it was fun, but learning doesn't just stop at fun. It has to integrate and has to support other parts of their learning experience. And the students said that the virtual dry labs helped them provide context for what was demonstrated in the wet lab. It helped them understand the concepts that were taught to them in lecture hall and helped them understand cross-sectional anatomy, which is essential for a provider to be able to read a CT or an MR. So ultimately, cadaveric wet lab and virtual dry lab experiences are not mutually exclusive, and they shouldn't be. These two different immersive experiences should support and reinforce each other. As this is a hybrid course, the students had been using the VH Dissector for months. And they said that the virtual module gave them additional insight. This immersive environment of virtual reality really helped them to bring concepts together and integrate their learning across wet labs, group work, and lecture-based content. And a vast majority of the students said that if given the opportunity, they would choose to learn with the VH Dissector software in VR again, because they found it to be so valuable. Thank you so much for attending and listening. This is a perfect time for questions, and if you'd like more information and a personalized demonstration, please contact our sales team. So Josh Bankston asks, which hardware platforms do we currently support? Well, we support PC and Mac. We also support iOS for iPads. For our virtual reality software, we support any Steam VR or Windows Mixed Reality compatible devices. And we also support Varjo XR. And so the Varjo XR3, the Varjo VR3, et cetera. And as well as supporting the Microsoft Hololens 2. We're currently developing broader support for other standalone or untethered VR headsets, such as the Oculus Quest 2, but those are still currently in development. Now, Tom asks me to describe the classroom capability with the Sectra table and VR. Absolutely. So the Sectra table is a large format 65-inch multi-touch display. And we have a feature that we are currently building out called the Classrooms feature. The Classrooms feature allows multiple individuals across platforms to interact in the same virtual space. And so all of the anatomy visualization, the anatomy data, is synced across devices, across users, irrespective of their location to each other, which means that you could have a virtual dry lab experience with each student in a headset in different classrooms, in their homes, or even in different states. And the instructor could join and lead it through any of the compatible hardware. The integration that I had mentioned in my talk, where educators can bring their pre-existing content and bring it into the VH Dissector, learning modules, walkthroughs, etc. Those also work in our immersive learning environments. So you could create a module for studying the cranial nerves. And you could work on that module, you could study from it on your iPad, on your laptop, on a Sectra table, in the Hololens 2, and on a Varjo headset. And it will be the same content across platforms. Pat asks me to talk a little bit more about the possibilities of virtual labs versus dry labs and some pros and cons. Absolutely. And so one of the nice things about having a physical dry lab is you can have physical models. And you can have a box of bones. And you can interact with these collaboratively with your fellow students. One of the cons of models is sometimes in the effort to emphasize something, it can be a little misleading on other things because they are stylized to teach a particular thing. A virtual dry lab incorporating our models that were built from a real cadaveric data set are representative of this individual's true anatomy. And normal anatomic variations and all. And so by incorporating virtual elements into dry lab scenarios, you could ensure that the students are experiencing real anatomy in a very low stakes environment. If you're practicing a dissection protocol in a virtual dry lab, you don't have to worry about cutting through a nerve because you can just hit undo. If you've accidentally removed too many structures, you can put them back. And you could really get a good appreciation of the spatial relationships of the anatomy that you are studying without the worry of breaking something. And the students can take this confidence that they've gained in this virtual environment and bring it into the wet labs. And now when they're interacting with the cadaver, they can feel confident that they understand these relationships. They know where things are, and they can work more efficiently and gain a better understanding from the cadaver that they've been assigned. And so there's pros and cons to both. And ultimately, I think all three modalities are important for a well-rounded anatomy education. Pat asks, what can people look forward to in the way of new features from Toltec and also new features from the VH Dissector? That's a great question. So some of the things that we're working on right now, as I mentioned before, we're expanding the list of hardware that we can use, expanding into the untethered head-mounted display world, such as the Oculus Quest 2, which is actively under development. We are also developing new interactive features, a highly detailed annotation feature where you can drop pins and label them. You can ask questions with, you could customize the text on these pins you drop. And so much like you would in an in-person cadaver lab, where you drop a pin and you tag it with a question, you can do the same thing immersively. And beyond that, we'll also be developing out new and robust and enhanced ways to take medical imaging data and visualize it. Josh makes another great point. He said a key aspect for institutions to consider is a savings in insurance riders because the inherent risks of VR are almost negligible compared to wet lab usage. I also agree with that. And particularly with group learning activities in VR, you aren't blind to the world if you have a standard VR headset because you have teammates, you have group members who are supporting you. In the Baylor learning module, the role of the virtual dissector or the student in the headset rotated through a group of 4 to 5. The students outside of the headset, their role was to support the student in the headset, watch the cable, make sure they don't bump into anything, as well as they were the ones that had the structure ID list. They had the instructions of the activity. And so not only were the students looking out for each other educationally, but also physically. And they were able to practice their soft skills, such as communication, as well as learn the required anatomy material for their course. So thank you for that comment, Josh. Pat asks, if potential users are considering implementing XR where they haven't before, what suggestions can you share for getting started? What are some things to consider / look forward to? Excellent question, Pat. So with the adoption of new technology, it requires consideration of how to implement it. If you buy something, buy a piece of expensive lab equipment and you never use it, why'd you buy it? And so by thinking about how could our curriculum be enhanced? How can we support our students' learning? And we've talked a few times about making the most out of a cadaver, out of a wet specimen. And so coming into saying, what we want to do is to support our students' cadaver experience. And in order to do that, we will take this virtual experience and design the learning module to match what they would learn in the cadaver lab to support them. And so it's definitely very important before investing in this incredible technology to answer the question, what do we want to use it for? How do we want to enhance our students' learning? How do we want to support our educators and help them get across the concepts that is important to their curriculum? And some things to look forward to are, I was going to say big grins on the students' faces, but they'll be under the mask. And so, but you can look forward to excited and engaged students interacting in a new modality. It's one of my personal favorite things when I'm showing an expert VR, and they start saying, "Oh, I care about this procedure. How do I show this? How do I show this?" And then they say, "Oh my gosh, this is amazing." And so by experimenting with it and exploring, you can easily create an incredibly powerful experience for your students and educators alike. Plus, it makes your school look impressive when you say, we have a virtual reality dry lab. Josh makes a great comment. He says, finding the right industry partners to leverage their expertise, finding the right champions internal to your organization to take charge and run with it, to plan for implementation beyond R&D and investment, understand how it can scale beyond the first use, and last but not least, get people to try it. I absolutely agree with that statement. You have to get people to try it. It is very different putting a headset on than watching a video recorded off of a headset. I love Josh's quote, "Unfortunately, the matrix cannot be described to you. You must experience it for yourself." I think that is absolutely accurate. You have to put a headset on. You have to interact with the HoloLens. You have to grab a hologram and move it around. Interact with the cross-section data in virtual space. It's just an experience that you cannot imagine. Pat asks, is there a trial opportunity with the VH Dissector? And I think Tom, who is one of our sales rep, and he is in this chat, would be the perfect person to chime in the chat and answer that question. And I hope you have a great rest of the conference. It has been fascinating so far, and thank you again.